And Judge Buller was his voice, and I think when he pointed to the July phone call of last year from the holding center to the phone call to his mom, he might have sealed his fate.
A violent outburst in a Milwaukee courtroom as a man fights with deputies following a life sentence. 21-year-old Nathan Potter was shot to death last summer in Riverwest, and his 19-year-old killer has no chance of parole.
You and Nate attacked her?
It was both of us.
With what?
Like hammer thing. And then like a hammer thing with an axe at the other end.
When you are a teenager, you have your whole entire life ahead of you. The sky is the limit. But if you get mixed up in the wrong crowd and start making some bad decisions, your whole future can be taken away from you. The following stories tell the tale of teenagers whose poor choices caused them to wind up behind bars. This case took place back in 2019. Shondell Jackson, who was just 19 years old at the time, took the life of 21-year-old Nathan Potter. Nathan was a student at the University of Milwaukee and was simply minding his own business when Shondell and 20-year-old Derek Thomas ambushed him. They demanded money from him, but he gave them an honest answer. He didn't have any. Enraged, Shondell shot and killed Nathan, leaving him on the street. Both Shondell and Derek would later be arrested and charged in connection with Nathan's murder. Derek told police the reason Shondell killed Nathan was because he had no money to hand over. The young man's killer was now behind bars, facing possibly decades in prison if convicted. One of the most shocking aspects that made this case as famous as it would become is just how cruel and clearly remorseless Shondell was throughout the trial. He was incredibly disrespectful to the victim's family, showing just what a true monster he really is. At times, he could be seen smirking, even during the victim impact statements. Shondell was ultimately convicted of Nathan's murder. Watch his reaction as his sentence is read aloud. It is nothing short of horrifying.
I am going to go ahead on count one, the first degree intentional homicide conviction, and I am going to sentence Mr. Jackson to life imprisonment without possibility for extended supervision. I know that that is something that is reserved for the most serious of cases, and I believe that this case rises to that level.
The judge explained that she did not feel the community would ever be safe as long as Shondell was out of prison. As soon as he heard his fate, he tried desperately to glare at the victim's family while police struggled to control him. They ultimately had to use tear gas while removing him out of the courtroom. Jennifer Mee became famous as a teenager for a really weird reason. She had an unexplainable case of hiccups that just wouldn't go away. She was a medical mystery who appeared on different television shows where she talked about her condition. She relished the fame, but when her hiccups went away, the popularity did too. Jennifer was desperate to reclaim her fame, and so in 2010, she and some friends hatched an evil plan. She met a 22-year-old man online named Shannon Griffin. She arranged to meet up with him for a date, but ended up luring him to a vacant home where her friends were waiting for him. He was shot 4 times and killed. Jennifer and the rest of those involved were arrested not long after. She was charged with first-degree murder. Tearfully, she made a confession to the police while in custody.
When I walked up, I was to the corner. I heard the first gun. After the first gun, I ran.
You are listening to me describing to detectives the shooting death of 22-year-old Shannon Griffin last October.
Today's date is October 24, 2010.
Gasping through tears, she admits meeting Griffin online and luring him to a vacant home with promises of marijuana, but there was no marijuana.
In 2013, Jennifer was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Take a look at her distraught reaction. In a jailhouse interview, she said she never meant to kill anybody.
To this day, I still truly don't know and understand what took place for them to do what they did.
Dylan Shoemaker was just 16 years old in 2013 when he committed the ultimate crime. He took the life of 23-month-old Austin Smith, his girlfriend's baby boy. Dylan had been babysitting the child and became enraged when he wouldn't stop crying. He brutally beat Austin, causing a severe brain bleeding that eventually led to his death. Dylan said that he never intended to kill the child, but when the case went to trial, the jury didn't believe him. While entering the courtroom, he burst into tears and called out to the mother of the slain child.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Actually, I really didn't. I really think I should. I didn't mean to hurt him.
Dylan would go on to express remorse over what happened, claiming he would take it back if he could.
I wish I could. I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
But the judge didn't believe that this remorse was authentic. He read aloud the transcript of a damning phone call that Dylan made while behind bars. It seemed to suggest that he totally believed that he was going to get away with what he had done.
The record will show that you admitted on July 23rd, 2013, in a phone call to your mother from the holding center, you stated, and I got a quote from the court reporter, "I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me."
But that was not the case, as he would ultimately be convicted and sentenced to 15 years to life behind bars. Watch as his face crumbles as he realizes that he is not getting out of jail anytime soon.
And Judge Buller was his voice, and I think when he pointed to the July phone call of last year from the holding center to the phone call to his mom, he might have sealed his fate.
In October of 2012, Brandon Spencer attended a Halloween party being held at the University of Southern California. Unfortunately, this night of lightheartedness quickly turned deadly. An argument that was rumored to be had between Brandon and a member of a rival gang broke out and resulted in 4 people being shot. While everyone survived their injuries, Brandon took the fall for the incident and was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder. He was later convicted. Watch how devastated the young man looked in court as he comes to grips with what had happened and laid his head on the desk in front of him. While in tears, Brandon begged the judge to have mercy on him.
"I'm sorry for what happened to your uncle, but I need life in prison. And I'm not a bad person, but I made mistakes. I'm not just some gangbanger that she tried to portray me as."
Despite the fact that there was limited evidence to prove that the shooting was Brandon's fault, he was sentenced to spend the next 40 years behind bars. This was a controversial sentence, not only because many did not believe that he was guilty, but because he hadn't killed anyone. Some have spoken out to criticize the decision.
I took a step back and actually looked at the situation, and I felt like although he came there with those intentions, I don't think he was deserving of 40 years to life. That's completely wrong, especially since he doesn't even get an opportunity to learn from the situation.
Petitions have also been started in hopes of landing Brandon a second chance at life. They have reached thousands of signatures, but for now, Brandon remains behind bars. Can you imagine betraying the 2 people that were always there for you when nobody else was? That's what 15-year-old Marty Fuller did in May of 2019. Marty had a difficult home life and was at times kicked out and left with nowhere to stay. It's hard to imagine that someone so young would have to worry about such things. But luckily for Marty, he did have 2 people in his corner: his ex-girlfriend, 15-year-old Kylie Jugga, and his stepmother, Stephanie. On nights when he was without a place to stay, Stephanie permitted him to stay at their home. Despite their generosity, things would take a dark turn when Kaylee and Marty's relationship ultimately came to an end. Kaylee and Marty got into an argument during which Marty blamed Kaylee for kicking him out of school and removed from the football team. Unable to contain his rage, he came up with a deadly plot. Marty knew a lot about Kaylee, including not only her daily schedule, but the floor plan of her home. After all, he had been there plenty of times before. He used this information to his advantage. He borrowed a gun and some ammunition and then waited for Kaylee to return home from school. He then entered the home from the garage and shot her multiple times, killing her.
And what happened after you heard her scream? I heard a shot. I stopped in my doorway And I looked at him and I said, "Oh my God, Martise." I said, "Please, you don't have to do this." And he looked at me and he said, "Yes, I do."
Martise was arrested and charged with Kaylee's murder. Despite the defense saying that it cannot be proved that it was without a doubt Martise was in the home that day, Stephanie claims she knows what she saw and that she knows it was Martise. In March of 2017, the fate of 17-year-old Marty Fuller was put into the hands of a jury. In court, Martise could often be seen visibly emotional as he prepared to learn what sort of future he would have.
The verdicts read as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
Imagine being only a teenager and knowing that you're likely going to spend most, if not all, of your entire life behind bars. To know that you're going to be given a second chance. Martise continued to claim that he was innocent until the very end.
So I am sorry. Despite the hatred that is against me, I still am sorry. But I have to continue to stand innocent because I am.
But the judge presiding over the case didn't buy it. Ahead of sentencing, she told him that she believed that he was truly capable of taking another innocent life again one day. For that reason, he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. He may have had his life as he knew it taken away, but he also took away Kaylee's life completely. Justice was served. Can you imagine the pure rage it would take to actually go through with killing one of your own parents? That is a rage that a teenager named Sierra Haaseth once knew. In April of 2021, Sierra was just 16 years old when she and her boyfriend, Aaron Guerrero, who was then 18 years old, made the decision to kill Sierra's father. Her father was 45-year-old Daniel Haaseth. On the day before the murder was to take place, Sierra ran away from home. With the help of Aaron, she purchased a saw, blades, bleach, lighter fluid, gloves, and a drop mat. The following day, she and Aaron stabbed Daniel and cut him relentlessly more than 70 times. It was surely brutal, painful, and an incredibly horrific death. They then attempted to burn Daniel's house down after stealing his car and money from him. They were captured in Salt Lake City just days later and brought into custody. Sierra would allege that her father had been abusing her in different ways and also tried to force her to drink alcohol despite being well underage. However, the prosecution believed there was more to the story. A video was found that the two teens had taken in which they could be heard laughing and cracking jokes about the horrible crime they had committed. Daniel also knew that the two had planned to run away together to Los Angeles and that he had been trying to keep them apart. The fact that they also stole from Daniel would also suggest that greed had been a significant motive. Both Aaron and Sierra pled guilty to murder. It's no surprise that with a crime this evil, both Sierra and Aaron could plan on hefty prison sentences. But just how severe? You'll barely believe your ears. Watch as Sierra remains stoic as she learns her fate. She didn't look scared, nor did she shed a single tear.
You're going to be ordered to pay $2,125 in extradition fees. You're also going to be ordered to pay $5,000 in restitution to victims of crime, and that'll be done jointly and severally with the co-defendant. On count one, you're going to be sentenced to 48 to 120 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections.
Now, you may be thinking, 10 years in jail for brutally murdering your dad? That doesn't sound so bad, but don't worry. This judge is only clearing her throat when handing this sentence down.
On count two, you're going to be sentenced to life in the Nevada Department of Corrections with the possibility of parole after 20 years has been served, plus a consecutive 24 to 60 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections with deadly weapon enhancement. Count two is ordered to run concurrent to count one.
So now we're up to 15 years, but the judge still isn't done. That's because Sierra was facing not just 1 or 2 charges, but 9.
On count four, you're going to be sentenced to 19 to 48 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections. That's ordered to run concurrent to count 3. On count 5, you're going to be sentenced to 19 to 48 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections. That's ordered to run concurrent to count 4.
By the time the judge had finished, Sierra had been hit with an incredible 148 years behind bars for her horrific crime. However, it is possible that due to her age, Sierra may one day see life outside of prison walls if she can manage to become eligible for parole. Aaron was also sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Do you think that these two ever deserve a chance at freedom again, or should they stay locked up for good? Let us know in the comments. This next story is one of the most calculated, cruel, and heartless murders committed by teens in recent history. And the victim was that of a young and innocent teacher who was just starting her career. Colleen Ritzer was a 24-year-old math teacher who taught 9th grade at a Denver high school. She was well loved by her students and cared deeply about helping them to understand the material. She would even stay at school after hours to offer extra help. And that was exactly what she was doing on the evening of October 2nd of 2013, when 14-year-old Philip Chisholm, one of her students, decided to brutally take her life. Colleen briefly stepped away from her students to use the restroom, and sadly, she would never come out of that restroom alive. This is the last picture of her before her brutal murder. Philip would follow Colleen into the bathroom, where he brutally assaulted her and attacked her with a box cutter. He then went and got a trash bin, as then seen in this picture. He put Colleen inside and wheeled her out of the school and into a wooded area. It was there that he would defile her body even further, likely while she was still alive. He then stole her belongings and left her half naked to die alone on the ground. As the evening passed on, there were multiple people that were worried. One was Colleen's dad, as she had never returned home. He drove to the school and found her car in the parking lot, but no sign of her. Meanwhile, Philip had also not returned home, and his worried mother alerted the authorities. Many wondered if the two disappearances could be connected. The police searched the area for Philip and eventually found him walking along the side of the road. They checked his bag, and inside they found Colleen's personal belongings. They questioned him, and he eventually admitted to what he had done. He was taken into custody. Not long after, police located Colleen's terribly battered body in the woods. By looking at her pair of blood-covered jeans, you can imagine just how horrific the moments were and how much pain she went through. Philip was charged with Colleen's murder and was tried as an adult.
It should have been a normal day in the middle of the afternoon. And make no mistake, they didn't happen to Philip Chisholm. He did these terrible things to Colleen Ritzer, and she was only 24 years old. And the only still image that matters in this case is the image of Colleen in the woods. The image that the defendant painted of Colleen stripped, battered, brutalized, and violated.
Philip was sentenced to a minimum of 40 years in prison. Antonio Barbaro and Nathan Pepe were two money-hungry children that allowed their greed to cause them to do the unimaginable. In 2012, Antonio, who was just 12 years old at the time, killed his 78-year-old grandmother, Barbara Olson. His best friend Nathan helped. Antonio and Nathan knew that Barbara had some money, and so they came up with a plot to not only steal from her, but brutally kill her. When they arrived at her house, they went to the front door where Barbara greeted them. She was ready to welcome them inside with open arms, but could never have imagined what they would do then. Together, using a hammer and a hatchet, Antonio and Nathan beat Barbara relentlessly while she cried out in pain and begged them to stop. They then stole her money, some jewelry, and her car, and then fled. Bloody clothing, as well as a watch that belonged to Barbara, was later found at Nathan's house, and both he and Antonio were brought into custody. They both later confessed.
You and Nate attacked her?
It was both of us.
With what?
Like hammer thing, and then like a hammer thing with an axe at the other end.
They would both be convicted for this horrific crime.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Nathan J. Pop, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
14-year-old Nathan Pop guilty of brutally murdering a 78-year-old woman, Barbara Olson.
Nathan received life in prison with the possibility of parole when he reaches the age of 45 years old. Meanwhile, Antonio will be eligible for parole in 35 years. He appeared distraught at the sentencing.
I know I don't show my emotions much. I myself, I'm not sure why. But that doesn't mean I don't.
For now, both Antonio and Nathan remain behind bars. In 2013, then 15-year-old Conrad Shafer went on a reign of terror. He, along with 3 other young friends, decided to open fire on random innocent people in Osceola County, Florida. Their random gunshots would end up taking the lives of 2 people who had just been minding their own business. One of those people was David Guerrero, who was just 17 years old. David had been on the way to catch a bus to take him to work. They killed David for no reason but for petty, heartless fun. But they weren't done yet. They would later force their way into the home of another man. This victim was 22-year-old Eric Rapinare, who was reportedly beginning his life before the teens killed him too. For 2 weeks, the community was terrorized as they did not know who committed these random acts of violence and who would be targeted next. Finally, Conrad was identified as one of the suspects and brought into custody. He would later admit to what he had done and, as part of a plea deal, pled guilty to 2 charges of murder.
Investigators say Conrad Shafer was only 15 years old when he and a group of his friends shot up more than a dozen houses in Osceola County. They say he also killed 2 men before being arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
It's hard to imagine being just 15 years old and one night ruining your life forever. But that is what Conrad did. He was ultimately sentenced to 2 life terms in prison with the possibility of a review of his case in 25 years. He hung his head low upon receiving his sentence, 3 years following the tragic events. He remains behind bars and very well could remain there for the rest of his life. This is an especially disturbing and graphic case that is almost hard to stomach. Matthew Borges of Salem, Massachusetts is the criminal in this case, and he was just 15 years old when he beheaded his own classmate in November of 2016. The victim was 16-year-old Lee Manuel Villaroro Paulino. You're probably wondering what sort of rage could possibly come over a 15-year-old child to cause him to do something like this. Well, prosecutors say that it was all because Lee had spent time with Matthew's ex-girlfriend, and he became jealous and infuriated when he found out. Lee's body, with the head detached, was stumbled upon by a person who was walking their dog alongside a river. It is hard to imagine the horror of coming across this disturbing scene. Lee's head was later retrieved nearby. While Matthew would later tell police that he didn't have anything to do with Lee's murder, he allegedly told a friend that he lured Lee out of his home and stabbed him to death before cutting his head off. That friend would later testify against him on the stand. The defense tried to suggest that this friend was just lying and that there wasn't enough evidence to tie Matthew to the crime. The case would end up being handed over to a jury.
A Lawrence teenager is now a convicted killer found guilty of murdering and beheading a classmate.
Now convicted of first-degree murder, could Matthew, even at such a young age, still be sentenced to life behind bars?
It is ordered by the court that he be punished by confinement for a term of life, with parole eligibility on the theory of extreme atrocity and cruelty at 30 years.
It is possible that after decades have passed, Matthew may one day be a free man once again. Roxanna Skierowski was adopted by a loving new family that brought her to America away from a Polish orphanage where she was abused as a child. Despite her new family's willingness to give her a better life, when she turned 15 years old, she and her older boyfriend, Michael Rivera, came up with a plan to wipe out her entire family. They planned that after she had killed everyone, she and Michael would run away together. While Michael waited outside on a fateful night in October 2014, Roxanna began to carry through with her plan. She brutally stabbed her 12-year-old brother, but his screams were enough to get the attention of other family members, which stopped the rampage before anyone else could be injured or killed. Her brother managed to survive his injuries. Roxanna was hit with many different charges, including 4 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. She pled guilty.
But we do begin with our breaking news. 17-year-old from Plymouth Township will spend 10 to 20 years in prison after being sentenced in a plot to kill her own family.
Despite everything, Roxanna's mother does hope that she will be able to return home to her family one day. Now and again, you will come across a cold-hearted criminal who quite literally has no remorse or heart whatsoever and isn't afraid to show it. Even in court, TJ Lane is one of those people. TJ Lane is a whole different kind of evil, as she showed many times throughout court. He was 17 years old in 2012 when he entered a high school in Ohio and shot 6 people, killing 3 of them. He showed no remorse whatsoever.
As soon as TJ Lane walked in, he was executing his plan, taking off his button-down shirt to reveal this: a white t-shirt with the word killer scribbled on it, showing it off with a smug smile on his face. He wore one like it the day of the shootings.
And there was no explainable reason for TJ to open fire on those innocent kids, but he did so anyway. And even likely facing a lifetime behind bars, he didn't seem to be the least bit sorry about it. He was practically gloating.
Parents of the victims called Lane a monster, a pathetic excuse for a human being, and wished him a slow, torturous death.
I hate you for the pain you've caused, Nick. You chased him down the hall and fired the last bullet that paralyzed him. Why? Why did you do it?
At one point, TJ even held up his middle finger to the grieving parents. He received 3 well-deserved life sentences without the possibility of parole. In 2006, Dexter Johnson was just days away from his 18th birthday when he made a horrific mistake that almost cost him his entire life. He, along with some other teenage friends, carjacked and robbed 2 people. The victims were 23-year-old Maria Aparsi and 17-year-old Hoy Noiguo. The 2 had been sitting together outside of Hoy's home and never saw the attack coming. Dexter and the rest of his friends forced Maria and Hoy to come with them to a secluded area. Dexter then sexually took advantage of Maria before one of his friends shot and killed both her and Hoy. But this was not Dexter's only crime. He and his friends went on a rampage that went on for 25 days and claimed the lives of 3 additional people. The crimes were cold, calculated, and horrific. In 2007, Dexter, then 18 years old, was convicted for his part in the slayings and sentenced to death. He remained on death row for years, and then in 2019, he was finally set to die. He was 31 years old at the time. However, just 24 hours before Dexter's execution was expected to take place, he got a miracle. A federal appellate court halted the execution. This happened because of some reports that Dexter may have an intellectual disability and extremely poor IQ. If it could be proven that he is intellectually disabled, he may live out the rest of his days behind bars without ever having to face execution. Samantha Grigg, along with 2 other teenagers, robbed and took the life of 19-year-old Michigan State University student. The victim, Dustin Frolka, allegedly owed a drug debt to the group. His body was found left on a stretch of interstate. Samantha was arrested and charged with manslaughter and unarmed robbery. She pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against the 2 other suspects, Tyrell Burnitz and Brendan Hyam, in exchange for a lighter sentence. She testified that Tyrell and Brendan brutally beat Dustin in the back of a moving vehicle before he jumped out of the car to escape, but later died. She also said that she agreed to go along with the plan because Tyrell and Brendan told her they would give her $100 in gas money. She believed that the plan was to rough Dustin up, but not to kill him. Before brutally beating Dustin, Samantha drove around to different ATMs while the teens forced him to withdraw money and give it to them. When he rolled out of the car, Samantha stopped the vehicle. Tyrell and Brendan took Dustin's money and clothing and drove off, leaving him behind. Samantha expressed remorse for her role in what happened and was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. As the teens in this video found out, it only takes a second to ruin your life forever. Nothing is worth spending years of life behind bars for. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on other content.